All right, thank you, everyone. This is being recorded, so I'm assuming at some point it will be available. And everything that I'm going to show you today, the slides, all my samples, and scripts will also make available to you in some fashion, either on the SQL Past site or on my blog. But don't worry about it. At some point, you'll find all the stuff that I'm going to show you. As Aaron mentioned, real quickly, tomorrow, and hopefully everyone can see this, is a virtual event with Jeffrey Snover, who is the main force, driving force at Microsoft behind PowerShell, and Jason Helmick, PowerShell expert and really pretty solid trainer. If you've never seen Jason speak, he's pretty good. He's good to watch, good to listen to. Anyway, this is free. It looks like it's online. I'm assuming you can still register. It's at the Microsoft Virtual Academy. So if you go to microsoft.virtualacademy.com and search for this Getting Started with PowerShell 3, maybe you can check that out tomorrow. So today, what I want to talk about is creating HTML reports with style. And obviously we're going to be talking about, or maybe not so obviously, talking about PowerShell. And we're going to talk about using PowerShell and primarily convert to HTML. And I'm going to show you a bunch of tricks and tips and some techniques so that you can create some pretty snazzy looking reports. I do have some examples that are for kind of the general IT pro, and also have some examples that I've kind of fine-tuned for SQL people. So hopefully you'll find some of these interesting. Really nothing I'm showing you is, production level perfect. Boy, I wish I could buy that. But they should give you a good starting point for your own scripting work with this topic. So first off, you have to read the help and examples for convert to HTML. And I'm assuming that everyone is just seeing my screen and not seeing the little GoToWebinar control panel, which is on my screen. If that's not the case, then Aaron, let me know and I'll try to hide that. So even though I'm going to show you a lot of things with convert to HTML, I'm not going to cover probably every single thing, so be sure to read help and examples. The style that we're going to be using is done with cascading style sheets, or CSS. I am not a web developer. The CSS that I'm using is stuff that I have found on the web, stuff that I have fumbled together to figure out, okay, I think I understand how this works. Obviously, the more proficient you are with CSS and building snazzy style sheets, even sexier the way your things will look. My stuff, you'll probably see, is going to be pretty basic. Very important, when we are taking data and we want to create these HTML reports, make sure you only convert the data that you need. When you run a command like get service and pipe that to convert to HTML, by default it's going to use all of the properties. You very rarely need all of the properties. You're going to get a lot of other information. That's not going to convert very well, especially if what you're converting is a nested object. We're running the same things when we pipe something to convert to CSV. You want to keep your data flat and only convert the data that you need. We're going to be using a lot of HTML fragments. Now you can, obviously take one command and build a simple HTML table. The stuff that I'm going to do may have bits and pieces drawn from different commands. So I'm going to create a final report using fragments, and I'll show you how easy this is to do. Once we have my fragments, then I can either append or prepend additional text or information into my final report. And these are all the things I'm going to kind of show you. I'm going to go through all my slides here and then do all the demos at the end. So the fragments we're going to create, convert to HTML has a parameter called -as. By default, if you use a create a fragment as a table, that will be the default. Or you can do it as a list. Remember, convert to HTML does not create files, it just creates HTML text. We can then parse that HTML, we're going to save that to a variable, and parse that possibly with simple string replacements. You can use regular expressions in XML. We can use the document object model, depending on what you need to do. And I have some examples, again, that you'll see of this in a little bit. So I can create my HTML fragment, and then if I want to fine-tune it, such as putting in some additional style elements, say, into a table row or whatever, this is how I'm going to accomplish that. We're going to use a CSS file, or at least the information in a CSS file. Now, when we're creating our report, we can run convert to HTML and specify, there's a parameter to specify the path to the CSS file. By all means, you can certainly use that. You'll want to test your CSS file for browser compatibility. If you are publishing a report, say on an intranet server, that's a nice thing because you can have your CSS file on your intranet server, point your command to that CSS file, and you're good to go. One thing I have discovered over the years, if you are using Google Chrome and you have trouble with your CSS file displaying properly, add this @set UTF-8 as the first line in your CSS file, and then Chrome should properly display it. Otherwise, your CSS file may only display in Internet Explorer. So you'll need to test depending on obviously what browsers you might be using. The other way that we can do this is we can take the CSS information and embed it right in the header, basically build HTML code for the header and include that in our HTML report. When we create convert to HTML, when we run that command, we can say use this information. We can either just use get content and pull it directly from a CSS file, or we can use a here string and define it directly within our script. A lot of the things that you're going to be doing if you will be creating these reports is probably going to be done with a script, which is what I'm going to be showing you in a little bit. If you embed it then in the report, it makes your script a little more portable. Other options, and I'm going to show you some of these. Obviously, the more HTML tricks you know, the more that you can kind of incorporate yourself into your style sheet. Things like alternate row shading, conditional formatting, so that if a value is of a certain range, I want to make that text red, for example. We can throw in images, embed them right into the graphic. There's a whole wealth of things that you can do with JavaScript. If any of you are familiar with Alan Renouf's vcheck script, which checks VMware servers and builds this incredibly complex and really cool HTML report, you can do all that in PowerShell. I'm not really going to go into any JavaScript things because I'm not a JavaScript, I'm not a web developer, but if you have those kind of tricks in your tool belt, you should be able to plug those pieces into what I'm going to show you. All right, so let me quickly show you how you might want to do alternate rows. Often this is done with tables. We're going to define in our style, and on the right side there you can see the style definition. This is something that I would put directly into the script file, and I've highlighted in red the line in general here. I want to say for every odd or nth child row, I'm going to set the background color to a particular color. And certainly you can set that style to be whatever you need it to be. But the end result then, in this case gray, is something like that. So I have this table in my report with nice alternate rows, white, gray, or whatever style you decide you need it to be. I find that something like that really much easier to read, especially if you have a long table with lots of rows. Another trick that you can do is conditional formatting. What I do is, and I'm not saying that what I do is the only way that you can do this, but this works for me anyway, is in my style, I'm going to define a conditional style as a class. So I've got, you see there, .danger and .warn. Those are the classes within my style definition. So if something is specified with the class danger, I'm going to change the background color to red, and then the warning, the background color will be yellow. This is assuming then that I'm doing this in a table. I then convert my data to HTML. So in this, let's say $drives is some collection of drive information, convert to HTML as a fragment, and I save that to a variable. Then I can use XML and parse that object and insert the class so that I can get the column that has the number that I want to analyze. If it falls within a certain range, then I can insert the appropriate class. When I build my HTML final report, the class tag will be inserted into the HTML, the style will be applied, and I get exactly what I want, yellow and red, depending on the condition of whatever the data is in that last column in this particular example. Embedding images. This is something I picked up from the PowerShell Deep Dives book, which should be out any day now. You can, when you build your report, you can always put in an image tag and say, I want to load this image from this particular web server, internet server, or whatnot. So that's really handy for intranet reports. Or if it's just something you're building and only going to look on your computer, you can reference the image file on your computer. But if you wanted to move that file or make it more portable, it's kind of problematic. By embedding the image directly into the file, now the file becomes much more portable. Great if you want to, say, build an HTML document and then send that as email. You could actually send, with send mail message, you can say, take this body, which would in this case just be all HTML, and send it as an HTML email message. So you can put in a graphic and have all your other style all embedded in, and so the email comes perfectly formatted as a nice HTML report. That'd be pretty cool. The way that we do this is we're going to take our image file and convert it to base 64. So we're going to use a little .NET voodoo here. $image file would be the path to the file. We specify the encoding that we want. And then I'm going to take that stream of bits and insert it into my HTML. So I'm basically creating a little HTML fragment here. You'll need to, this particular example is saying, excuse me, I'm creating a PNG file. If you're creating a JPEG or other formats, you may have to look at the data, at the documentation from MSDN and how to do this kind of conversion. I typically do everything as PNG, but if you were doing something else, you'd have to adjust that data, that image attribute there. All right, so those are kind of my little slides there. So let's go into PowerShell and let me walk through all of these things so you can see these in action. You've got the slides there as a reference. And again, everything I'm going to show you here should be available online somewhere. All right, so I'm in the PowerShell ISE. I am running PowerShell version 3 on Windows 8. I don't think there's much I'm showing you, even though my scripts will say showing that requires version 3. I don't think there's much I'm doing here that specifically requires version 3. All right, so let's, first of all, let's look at some typical examples. These are kind of the steps here. So I'm going to create a variable for my computer name, which I'm going to reuse here. So I always tell people, first thing you want to do is make sure you start with good data. So I'm going to use getSimInstance. So this is a PowerShell version 3 feature, and return just the name, display name, state, and start mode property, and save that to a variable $data. Now I'm just kind of walking through these things so that we can so you can better understand the steps here. Once you understand what you're doing, then obviously you just write your script and run it. So there's $data. All right, so that has just the data that I want. And what I want to do is create HTML from this. So let's build a simple report using an external style sheet. So I have here a style sheet in my scripts directory called blue.css. So here's that line for Chrome compatibility. Here's all the definitions for my style sheet. I'm going to define a path to that I want to save the file to. I'm just going to put it in my temp directory, and it's going to be called basic.htm. Now here's the magic part. So I'm going to take my data, I'm going to pipe it to convert to HTML, I'm going to specify a title. Now so this all fits on easily on the screen, I'm just using the backtick as a line continuation character. Specifying the path to my CSS file. This is pre-content, so this will show before the data. And now all I'm doing is putting the computer name in an H2 tag. And then after my data, which is just going to end up, well, you'll see what it's going to be, I'm putting in italics just the current date and time. So if I were to do just that much, let me select that without creating the file. Just see, convert to HTML just creates HTML. It doesn't create the file. If I want to create the file, then I pipe it to outFile. And I've also found I run into fewer problems if I set the encoding to ASCII. The default will be Unicode, so you can decide whether you need to or not. I'm always happy to make that ASCII, so now I'll just run all of that. So that took that HTML, created the file, and we'll just use invoke item to open that file. Should open up here in, and all I did was highlight the E. Let's try that again. All right, so here is my file. You can see it's in the temp directory. This is the blue style sheet, which basically means it's got the blue font. So here's my table, because the data is just that service information I got from getSimInstance. And it just created a basic table, all nicely formatted using my style sheet. So that's the pre-content, which I just threw in the computer name. And the post-content, I just put in the date and time of when I ran the report. So that's kind of a basic way of, and that's what most people start off using, convert to HTML. If I didn't use the style, if I didn't have this CSS line, then I'll just get really kind of plain vanilla HTML on a white page. Now this file that I created will only work as long as it can find this style sheet. If I move this file or send it to someone else and they try to open it, they won't get that style sheet, and so they won't get all of the style. All right, let's look at then my next iteration here. My computer name is still the same. I'm going to use getSimInstance again and retrieve the volume information from my computer. Let's clear the screen there. Again, I'm going to get data. So for each item in my collection of drives, or volumes I should say, I'm going to create a ordered hash table. This is a PowerShell version 3 feature. You could get rid of, you could make this version 2 by changing this to get WMI and get rid of the ordered attribute. But I'm going to create an ordered hash table that will have the volume, drive letter, the device ID, shows whether it's compressed, the size in gigabytes, the free space in gigabytes, and then a % free. And all of this can be run as a complete script. So I'm just going to quickly go through this, and then I'll just run the whole script and see how this works. And then for each volume, I'm creating an object, and that will be stored with $drives. Now in this particular case, I'm going to create a here string with my header. So I've got things like the title, here's my style, and here's my conditional formatting that you saw in the slides. So I'm going to create a fragment. Now by default that's going to be a table. So I'm going to take dollar drives, convert it to HTML, and I'm going to get an XML document. Using the for enumerator and skipping the table header row, I can go through and look at this document and get the table row property and look at the value. And if the value is less than or equal to 25, then I'm going to set the class. I'm going to append a class property to the document. And if it's less than or equal to 30, I'm going to append the class of worn. So that's basically going to modify the HTML kind of on the fly if the value falls within those ranges for those volumes. I'm defining then a variable for the body. So I'm going to have a little header here. And then in this particular case, because I converted this to an XML document, the inner XML will be all of the HTML code. And that's what I want to be the body of my HTML document. So then all I'm left here is put it all together. And I'm going to convert to HTML. In this case, you notice I'm not piping anything into it because I basically have all the different components defined elsewhere. So I'm going to convert to HTML, specifying my header, my post content, my body, and then pipe that to out file. This is just going to go to drives.htm in my temp file. And you know what? Let's also make this encoding ASCII. And then I'm just going to view that. So let me save that. Let's just run this whole script. Runs pretty quickly, and there we go. So there is the conditional formatting that I got. Here's the title, so volume utilization for my computer. So that parsing of that XML document looked in the table and got this last value and said, oh, that's less than 20, so I'm going to insert the class. Here, if I bring up the page source, let's see if you can see that here. So I can make this a little bit bigger. All right, so there's that class danger. The code that I use using XML inserted this class, this tag, this attribute into the XML object. And then I just took the HTML text from the inner XML, and that became my body. So that's one way that you can put in conditional formatting. Let's go back a bit. Don't need to make it quite that big. All right. Hope you like that. All right, let's clear the screen here. Let's go back. Let's go one more. Let's just do the next step here. This is a different way we can do conditional formatting. All right, I'm going to remove, because I'm in the ISE variables, everything's in a global scope, so I just want to remove, make sure I start with a clean $HTML. Computer name should still be computer name. I'm just going to step through this here. Now I'm going to save my current location because I'm going to load the SQL Server PowerShell module. I'm running SQL Server 2012 Express on my machine, and when you import the SQL module, it will automatically change you to the SQL Server PS drive. Well, I don't need that. I prefer, because what I'm going to do, I don't need to change that, so I just change it back. And you do get a little warning here because some of the names include unapproved verbs. Another small pet peeve of mine with the SQL PowerShell provider, but I'll show you in my next demo how you can get rid of that warning. And my location is still set. And actually, it didn't change it because I've got SQL PowerShells already loaded. It's been loaded all day for me here. All right, so I'm going to do a directory listing of all the databases on my server. So I'm just going to create a variable to the path for those databases. This is the PS drive that I get from loading the PowerShell SQL module. And just for the sake of my demo, I'm going to only get the database information once. I'm just going to do a directory of that path and save the results to a variable. So I could do, if I was just looking at, I want to build a simple text report. You could take something like this. I could take that directory of databases, select a few properties, create a %free property that's going to take the space available, divide by 1K, and then divide that by the size. The values for the database information, like size, data space, and space available, it's kind of funky because some are in kilobytes, some are in megabytes. You just kind of have to know what it is that you're looking at. So I have to do a little trickery here to get everything so it looks somewhat the same. And I'm going to sort by %free and create a formatted table. Now what I like about this step that I'm showing you is that I can verify that I'm getting the data that I want and it looks the way I want outside of trying to deal with the HTML conversion. Because once you start throwing in the HTML conversion, then you're throwing in all sorts of other variables and things that could go wrong. And if something doesn't work, well, why isn't it working? Is it my command? Is it my HTML code? At least now I know I've got good data. And I can't stress it enough. Make sure you've got good data. That's what I want. I want to now make that into an HTML report. So what I want to do is I want to do something where I'll use my conditional formatting trick again, or that if the %free is less than 10%, I'm going to make that danger, and less than 20%, I'm going to flag that as being warning. While we're at it, let's go ahead and let's insert a graphic into my final report as well. So here's the steps. So I've got a path to the file. And then convert it to a bunch of bits, and then create an HTML code, basically the image tag. So we'll run just that much if you want to see what image HTML looks like. All right, so that's the embedded graphic. That's all that code there. And that's just basically HTML. Now I have a style sheet. So the title I'm going to embed in the header will be Database Utilization Report. Here's my style. Here's my warning and danger classes. I've got a style for the image, so it floats to the left. I'm putting the image HTML in part of the header. And then I've got a couple of returns. I've got another little header for database utilization, and then a couple other line returns. So I'm going to define that header. So if you want to see that, so there's $head that I just defined. Now I'm going to take my databases and create again, I'm going to use that same XML trick because it worked so well before. So I'm going to create the HTML fragment. And now I'm going to go through and parse my HTML object, which is XML. And if that value %free is less than or equal to 10, I'm going to add the danger, otherwise it'd be warning. So let's run that. My body, I was creating a here string here because I wanted it to insert some other things. I could just make this, the body could be HTML.inner XML. Nope. I accidentally ran the whole script, and that's what it looks like. I didn't mean to run the whole script, but that's the final result, because all that was left in my script here was to convert it to HTML, put in the header, send it to the file, encoding ASCII, and then view it. So here is the final report. There's the graphic embedded in the report. There's my title. I hit a couple returns. Here's the conditional formatting. So %free, that is less than 10, is red. Less than 20 is 12, and everything else is unaffected. So maybe you'll find that useful, maybe not. Hopefully you'll find that somewhat useful. So building that kind of conditional formatting, really not too difficult. The trickiest part probably is working with this HTML object and figuring out how to go through and find the information that you want. All right, so I'm going to put this all together in a final big report that I literally just finished about an hour ago. This is kind of inspired by, this is by Alan Renouf's VCheck. This is my SQL Server report, something that I could run every morning if I wanted to get a quick, kind of a snapshot look at the state of a SQL Server. So this is a script that takes as a parameter a computer name and then the path for a file. I'm just, again, putting this just in my temp directory. I'm going to define an empty array to hold all the fragments. I'm going to go through and grab a bunch of different pieces and then add them to the fragments. This script assumes that I may not have imported the SQL PS module. If you want to get rid of that warning, you can use the -disable name checking. That will suppress that warning. I'm going to get the server uptime. So I'm just using invoke SQL CMD from the PowerShell SQL module to return how long the SQL Server has been up and running. And this should really be $computer name. And I'm also getting the version. I'm creating an object here, basically a hash table. Now here's a little trick that I ended up doing with the version, because the version information that you get is basically a long string that can be broken. Well, you'll see that here. I'm sure most of you have seen what $version looks like. But I wanted to replace, in my final report, I wanted the version information to be on multiple lines. So I'm replacing the text, the carriage return, which is the backtick n, with a vertical pipe, because that vertical pipe shows nowhere else in the text. Because what I'm going to do is when I include that fragment, which is what I've done here, I can convert to HTML this uptime object. In this case, I'm going to do it as a list. I then have HTML here. That's what $temp is. And I'm going to replace, anytime it finds the vertical bar, the pipe symbol, I'm going to replace it with a line break. So an HTML line break. And I'll show you that when I get to the final report. I'm then querying services. So I'm getting all the services that have SQL in the display name. Again, selecting just the properties that I want. Adding a little header. Adding the fragments converted to a fragment. In this case, this will be a table. I'm now querying the databases. This is the same code that I just showed you a moment ago. Converting that to HTML. Although I'm not doing the conditional formatting there. I'm then querying the volumes. Again, this is what I showed you before. This I am doing the conditional formatting, and this is on the volumes, not the databases. I then create the report. I'm embedding my image again. Here's my style sheet with everything that I need in it. I create the document, convert to HTML, putting in all my pieces. Here's my post content, create the file, and then open it up. So let me save all of this, because this can run as a single report. And there we go. Something is not quite right there. Something just changed because I have this duplicated. I should only have this once. But there are I'll go back and look at that in a moment. So there's the uptime, start time. And then here's that version information. So without doing that little trick of replacing the carriage returns with the line break, this becomes one long line and scrolls and makes it just not very pretty to look at. So I did my little simple string replacement to get the code that I wanted there. Now I'm not quite sure why I've got two of these fragments here. We'll look back and look at that again in a moment. Here are my services. Again, I'm just using the alternate display trick I showed you before. Here's the database utilization. Now this is already sorted for me by %free. So at a glance I can see which databases may be problematic. And then the volumes for the server itself. And then here's my final report. And that's how easy, really, it is. I could run this as it is, just like this, to create the file that I could put up on a web server. I could take this code, and instead of sending it to a file, I could just save it to a variable and use that variable as the body of a mail message and specifying with mail message I want this to be an HTML document. Really, that easy. So real quickly, I want to go back and figure out why I got fragments twice for the, let's get rid of that. Run it one more time. And now I'm getting it 3 times. So something, and this is the danger that you get of running things in the PowerShell ISE, because I bet that I have something left over. Oh. I keep adding to temp. That should just be $TMP equals. That's the problem. There we go. That's what I was expecting. So now I have my report. I got a little header information that tells me about the server, services, database utilization, volume utilization, and you could certainly add whatever other information you would like with that. All right. So again, I will make all of these samples available to you. Let's go back to the slides here. In terms of some resources, again, the PowerShell Deep Dives book has a whole chapter on creating HTML reports written by Jonathan Med. You'll want to check that out. Don Jones has a free ebook, Creating HTML Reports in PowerShell, which will also kind of reinforce some of these things that I've shown you. If you're looking just for general information about PowerShell in general, PowerShell in Depth covers pretty much everything you need to know about PowerShell version 3. My blog is listed there. I also write, obviously, the Professor PowerShell column, although I haven't done anything with HTML reports in a while, but maybe I should remedy that. So that's kind of what I had here. I want to make sure we had plenty of time for questions and answers. So I'm assuming people will write questions if they have anything, and I'll do my best to answer them. Or Aaron can jump in if he's still around. Oh, I see someone asked me a report or a question, but I can't see it. Let me see if I can resize the... Oh, there we go. I had to resize the question thing because it was too shrunk. All right, so let me see here. Someone wants to know about the need to use XML. And what you're probably referring to is in my report here, and I can do this, I can kind of step through so you can see what I'm talking about here. So here's $HTML. And as you can see, this is now an XML document. So what I ended up having to do was go through HTML, gives me a table, there are all the TR. So all my code is doing is basically going through this object, this XML document, and looking at and then looking at that value. So that's why I converted that to XML, because it was much easier to, believe it or not, it's easier to work with the XML object and then using the XML commands to insert this class attribute. Because then when I load that back as HTML, everything works the way that I want it to. All right. Questions? Any ideas on multiple SQL servers in a combined report? You should be able to. I only have a single server, so I don't have the best situation for testing that. But anything that you could do just from the console, let's say getting the disk information and the version information. As long as you can do that for multiple servers from the console, anything you can do from the console, you should be able to convert to HTML just as easily. It really should not be any more difficult. Is there a way to automatically refresh the report? Not that I know of. Well, it depends on what you're doing, because the examples I'm showing you, I've got to requery the database, the database sizes, requery the uptime, requery, the amount of disk space. What you could do is, if you were building a report like this, say that was sitting on an intranet server, you could create a PowerShell scheduled job to basically create this report, put it up to the server, and run it on a regular basis. That would be probably the best way to do it. There's probably JavaScript that can refresh a page, but it's more than just refreshing a page, because the page is being generated from PowerShell. So you'd have to basically refresh or rerun the PowerShell command that generated the page. All right, other questions here. Is there a way to get data from an HTML document to be later used as variables? For example, have the user specify the computer name to run a report on. Well, yeah, I mean, anything that you could, just because I'm creating HTML documents doesn't, that's just one way of handling the data. If you want to create a script that uses read host to prompt the user for information and then have your script use those variables, sure, that would not be difficult at all, if I'm understanding that question correctly. Will the script work for many SQL instances? These will work, again, if you can run the command with what you want for whatever it is you're trying to do from PowerShell and get the results displayed to the screen the way that you want. Basically, again, comes back to, can I get good data? If you can get the data you want from PowerShell, then converting it to HTML and making the fancy reports like I'm doing, in some ways that's the easy part. The tricky part, especially if you're still new to PowerShell and trying to understand the SQL PowerShell provider is trying to get all that information. If you have to deal with multiple servers or multiple instances, you're primarily going to be using, say, a for each loop. There is a forum at PowerShell.org, so if you have questions, if you're trying to work with PowerShell, if you're still kind of new with PowerShell, trying to figure out how to work with PowerShell in general or PowerShell in the SQL commandlets, I encourage you to use the forums there. You'll get lots of really good help there. All right, let's see what else we got here. Oh, I think I may have answered that. Again, I'll make all these samples available. If you follow me on Twitter, I can bring up my contact information here. I blog quite a bit there. You're certainly welcome to email me if you are looking for PowerShell training. I am an independent trainer and consultant. I'm on Twitter quite a bit. I'm also on Google+, so you're welcome to use those places as well. And someone's mic just went hot.
Yep, that's me, Jeff. Sorry about that.
That's fine. Sounds like a party.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Wait, did you see there's a couple questions in there? Sorry, I'm just joining back in. My connection dropped a couple times.
I think I went through all the questions. Was there something that I missed?
Oh, okay, all right. No, I was just making sure you did. I was gone for a couple minutes.
Oh, you were gone. Okay.
So, yes. Yes. So I'm all set now. Sounds like you're wrapping up there. Is there anything else we need, or are we closing out?
Yeah, that was pretty much everything I wanted to cover. I appreciate everyone's time today. Looks like I answered most questions. There's thoughts about automated emailing of report. I feel like I just wrote about that either on my Professor PowerShell column or on the Petri Knowledge Base, another place that I write. I'll try to track that down and maybe tweet that. So,
okay, great. I'm going to put a follow-up post on the PowerShell virtual chapter page with the recording link, and then also, if you want to send me a link to that, I'll include that as well.
Okay.
All right, great.
All right, so I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording, and thanks everyone for coming.